Hello, Garland Nixon here. And France seems to be, the Macron regime at minimum seems to be biting the dust. And this is the beginning, I think, of this coalition of the willing. I think this is the bit we're starting to see the beginning of that internal collapse. Nixon
Let's
here.
talk.
Hello, all my dear and fluffy friends. Let's see who we got. Vincent, Myra, and everyone. Hello, hello, hello. All right. So let's talk. One of the things that I think is interesting, I'll start off here, and that is, one of the things I like to look at indicators, and I learn a lot from that. As you probably know, if you've been paying attention to Google for years, it's nothing but, a government in operation. It's masquerading as a private company, as a private and independent company, but it's government operation. And here's what's interesting. As I say, people say Google this or Google that. I do not use the term Google as a verb. I mean, it would be like saying to me, CIA this or CIA that, Google, CIA, whatever the case may be, because I go to Google when I want to see what the government wants me to think, or if there are major issues and I want to see what the government doesn't want me to talk about, right? So let me show you really quick an example. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's go to Google. We could actually use DuckDuckGo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search French protests. Let's take a look and see what we got. French protests. Here's a Google search. We got Al Jazeera. Tax the rich. French protesters cry as the wealthy push back on paying more. Strikes and look. Now think about this. The New York Times. The wealthy push back on paying more. Now it's obvious who they're speaking for. I mean, wouldn't you think a New York Times article, if the millions of French people are in the street saying, hey, as is the case, you got millions of French people saying, look, we've got economic problems that was caused by giving everything to the rich. And now you're going to make us pay by cutting services to the poor and the working class. No way the rich should pay more. Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, these are the masses saying, why should we pay? We got in this position because of the ruling elite making these decisions and because they're the ones that are robbing us. And now we got to pay for their screw ups. I don't think so. But the New York Times article says the wealthy push back, right? The New York Times article is going to be like, oh, for God's sake, let's see what the wealthy, what about the rich people? With a budget crisis looming, a proposal for a tax on ultra-high wealth individuals has grassroots support. By that, they mean everybody in France, except the 0.01%. But let's look at the second sentence. But it adds conflict to an already fragmented political landscape. So you got a bunch of people that can't afford to live. And now the ruling elite of France say, hey, guys, got bad news. We're running out of money thanks to our decisions and giving everything to the rich. And here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to take even more money from you. And what did the New York Times say? It adds conflict to an already fragmented political landscape. Fragmented meaning the masses of the working class are getting screwed, and a tiny little group of super rich people are living high on the hog. And there's a fragmentation there, yes, between 99.9% and 0.01%. That's the fragmentation that they're so concerned about at the New York Times. Look at there we go. Let us continue. One phrase was on everybody's lips: tax the rich, right? So budget crisis looming. Lawmakers with the power to bring down President Macron's third blah 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 are demanding that the very wealthy pay more to help fix France's finances. But the tax plan, which would place a new 2% levy on assets above 100 million euros, is rolling in already. fragmented political landscape. They're going to tax additional 2% on everything above $118 million. And it's really upsetting some people. The tax plan has become a totem of France's socialist and left-leaning parties. Business and right-leaning parties are warning of an economic calamity. Here's what's interesting. The working class is already suffering an economic calamity, and they want to make it worse by cutting more from them. And they're like, yes, businesses and right-leaning. In other words, the super rich, sure, it'll plug France's ballooning deficit and address inequality, but the rich people says it'll be an economic calamity for them. Think about this: 2% additional for every 118 million bucks that you make and or have will cause an economic calamity? Really? There we go. Oh my God, this would be a terrible obstacle to investment and risk taking, said Patrick Martin, the head of France's largest employers network. And introducing this tax would be a form of plunder. That's right. Do we really want to plunder the poor super rich by taking 2% out of every $118 million that they have? That would be plunder. We'd be plundering the rich. Now, of course, they have been plundering the working class for I don't know how long. They've been getting every dime they got to the old snowman Zelensky and his crew for them to steal it. But it would be a form of plunder to ask the people who've made all this money from this neoliberal finance capital economy to may perhaps give back a few pennies that they have robbed us of, so that other people could now this is going to sound stupid, so the masses could eat. Come on. Granted, I got $118 million and you don't have any food. So if I give up an extra 2%, you'll have some food. Well, that ain't fair to me. For God's sake. Why should I give up an extra 2% off of my 118 million just so you can have like food and a roof over your head and things like that? Unfair. Totally unfair. Calls for raising taxes on the rich are growing louder. Mr. Zuckman, 38, whom the French daily newspaper Le Monde called the billionaire's nightmare, has been advocating targeted wealth taxes for over a decade. So there we go. There's Mr. Macron. An economic professor at the University of California, Mr. Zuckman, entered the spotlight with claims that a 2% tax on France's 1,800 wealthiest individuals would generate $20 billion in revenue. Okay, whether it will or not, the proposal goes to the heart of a debate cleaving France. Should the government fix its finances by cutting spending on pensions, healthcare, and education? That would be the working class and the poor. Or by taxing ultra wealthy individuals at a time when the ranks of the super rich have grown? Oh, yeah, that's a real tough one. What should we do? We have put ourselves in an economic situation that calls for some kind of movement to bail us out of that. Now, should we cut pensions and healthcare and education for the 99.9% of the people, or should we take a small portion from the ultra rich who made all that money by advocating for us to screw the 99.9%? That's a tough one. I don't know. That's a question. That's the heart of a debate cleaving France. No, it ain't a debate cleaving France. If 99.9% of the people want something and the richest 0.1% don't, I wouldn't call that a debate that's cleaving France, would you? Protesters wielded tax the rich in major cities, chanted for fiscal justice. They had megaphones saying tax the rich, a solution to the debt. So what happened? How did this all come about? Macron's government last week submitted an austerity budget. It fell apart. That wanted $44 billion in spending cuts. It says that the country's finances have been deteriorating. Listen to this. The country's finances have been deteriorating. Listen to this. In part, because Mr. Macron's tax cuts for businesses and wealthy individuals have resulted in $50 billion in lost revenue annual to the Treasury. So they say right here, they're in a jam because a financial jam because of major tax cuts for businesses and the rich. And most of the people say, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we get some of the money back from the businesses and the rich? And it's controversial. Well, I don't know. We got here by giving all the money to the rich and giving all the money to these super corporations. That's how we caused this problem. But shouldn't we find another way other than just like make the people who put us in this jam give some of the money back? Controversial in that 0.01% who are actually running the government are opposed to it. That's how it's controversial, which goes to show how lopsided it is. And let me bet you this. When it's all said and done, that 0.01% is going to get their way. Let me see. The new prime minister is racing to draft a new budget. To survive, he needs the support of France's Socialist Party, which is demanding fewer spending cuts and more revenue from the Zuckman tax. Now, listen to this. A tax hit. Now, this is the New York Times. A tax hit on wealthy individuals, listen to this, could provide political cover for painful cuts that Mr. Lecornu also plans to make to social and welfare programs. In that sense, the tax has enormous symbolic value as a blow in favor of the égalité or equality after years in which Mr. Macron's tax cuts for the wealthy earned him the nickname president of the rich. So what they're really saying is this: just do it symbolically. Look, we still think that you should screw the poor people, but just take a few pennies from the rich, just a symbolic amount from the rich. Just symbolically take a little bit from the rich. That way you can really jam it to the poor people. Ha ha ha. That's the New York Times. That is the New York Times. The rich need to pay their fair share, is what we're saying. Let me see. We need more tax justice in France. Arthur Minch, chief executive of Mistral, the behemoth artificial intelligence startup, said in an interview on French television. But he also said that he obviously couldn't pay on the unrealized gains if the government imposed a 2% levy on Mistral's $11.7 billion market valuation. Not valuation. A market valuation is obviously not real. That's a projection of what you're worth on actual money. See, there you go. That's a straw man. Well, come on, man. We couldn't pay on market evaluation. Nobody's saying you have to pay on market evaluation. Nobody ever said, let's tax their market evaluation. But that's a good way to do a straw man. We can't do this because our market evaluation is too high. We couldn't pay it. Well, nobody asked you for that, but you're pretending as though they did. Nicolas de Fuhr, the chief executive of France's public investment bank, went further. The tax is actually communist, he said, adding that it was an expression of hate for the rich. I'll put it like this. If you don't get that, there's going to be an expression of hate for the rich, and you're going to end up with no head. See, that's the thing of these people. It's communist. The people are like, look, here in France, we're going broke. We're in the streets screaming because the government has driven us into poverty by giving tax cuts to the wealthy and the businesses. And we want the government to re-tax the wealthy and the businesses that put us in this jam to get us out of it. Think about it. You gave money to the rich, lots and lots of tax cuts, and now we're in an economic jam. Take some of it back. Don't say, well, I'm going to take more money from you. Why can't they give some of it back? They're the ones that caused it. And this guy says the tax is actually communist, he said. It's an expression of hate for the rich. So if I take money from you and you can no longer pay for food and lodging for your family, and you say, Well, Garland, I think you should give some of that money back because you're living high on the hog and we can't even afford food and rent. No, that would be communist and that would be hate for me. That's the mentality of the super rich. Communist and hate for the rich. Rhetorically, I guess if you're rich, that would be communist. Oh, well, never mind then. I guess what the people who can no longer afford to live, the people who the government is coming to them saying, hey, here in France, we're kind of running out of money. And we're running out of money because we gave everything to the rich. So we're going to take more from you so the rich, they don't have to pay anything back. That would be communist. It would be hate for the rich. We couldn't have that, could we? It doesn't matter what you call it. And it's hate for me to say you got rich and threw us in an economic jam. You should give some back to get us out of the economic jam. Why do I have to give more when you put us in an economic? You benefited from it. And he says that would be hate for the rich. Now it's about love or hate. You know what that reminds me of? The Putin stuff. Well, Putin's going to love this. Putin's going to hate this. Putin's upset because of this. It's always about some emotional thing. They're always reading the emotions of Putin. Well, if we do that, Putin's going to be frustrated. Well, if we do that, Putin's going to be happy. Well, Putin's happy that you said that. It's always some weird emotional crap that they're making up. And now this guy says it's hate for the rich. I don't care what you call it. You got rich off my back. If I'm a Frenchman, of course. And the French people are saying, no, you got to give some of that money back because we ain't giving up our pensions. But I got bad news for the French, for France. Do you know Macron worked for both Rothschild Bank and Goldman Sachs? His job is to specifically do what you're suffering from. The Rothschilds and the Goldman Sachsians of the world said, hey, why don't we put you in charge of France? Oh, what shall I do when I get there, sir? Well, Mr. Macron, your job is to take every friggin' dime you can get your hand on from the working class and give it to us. And then when the country goes into some kind of an economic downswing, yeah, you make those bastards pay for it, not us, because that would be communism and hate for the rich. And you wonder why there's revolutions. Mr. Zuckman pushed back on that, telling the New York Times that communism is when the state takes 100% of what you own. And here we're talking about just 2%. Now, see, whenever somebody plays a straw man, never, ever discuss it. If someone gives you that would be communism. And the guy goes, no, it isn't, because no, don't explain it. Let me explain something about debating. Let me explain something about the power dynamic of discussion, okay? If you're explaining, you're losing. If he says that would be communism and you're explaining, no, it wouldn't for this reason and that reason. No, you're losing. If you're in a conversation, I'll put it to you like this. And I learned this from sales. I was a salesperson, a pretty good salesperson. If you're in a conversation and things aren't going the way you want to, you need to regain control of the conversation. Anytime you're in a conversation, you need to regain control, because in a conversation, oftentimes there's somebody that has more control. Ask questions. The person that's asking questions has the power dynamic, has the increased power dynamic. If you're asking questions, you're in control. If you're answering questions, you're losing in a conversation where there is a power dynamic. Now, if there's no power dynamic, let's just say boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, and they're working with each other, they're having a discussion, and they're trying to iron out an issue and come to a resolution. Sure, ask, answer. But if it's a business deal, whatever, and you're trying to a debate, if you're answering, you're losing. So when the guy, it's not communism because of this, because of that, he's already lost the conversation. When the guy says that would be communism, you could say, well, I'll put it like this. Whatever you're calling what you've been doing ain't working for the working class. You're making excuses, buddy, because you are taking money from the working class and it's time you pay your fair share. No, it's not communism because of this or that. You've already lost that conversation because he's got you on your back foot. All right, let's continue. Supporters of a minimum tax on the super rich say the idea that billionaires will abandon France to avoid it, depriving the government of its very source of income it's trying to capture, is overblown, right? Here's the bottom line. So what are we talking about here? let's get back to the foundation of this discussion. There are a number of reasons you could argue why France is in a jam, but the reasons aren't French per se. The French people are going to look at it and it seems like it's French to them. It seems like Macron did something wrong. It seems like their government did something wrong. It seems like bad decisions were made. It seems something like that. Bad news for them, that ain't the case. You see, my dear and fluffy French friends, you are suffering from systemic success, not systemic failure. Hear me out. When people see a country, England, the US, France, Germany, whatever, and they see an economic problem, and that problem is identical in every single country, then there's no particular individual. This is not because of what the Republicans did or what the Democrats did. This is not because of what Trump did or what Biden did or what Obama did or what Bush did or what Macron did or what Merkel did or on and on and on. No. This is because there is a system. We shall call that system now. It depends on what you want to call it. Depends on your ideology. If you're more of the socialist nature, you're just going to call it capitalism. If you're more engulfed in this particular system, you may refer to it as neoliberalism. If you're more a conservative-minded person, you may call it globalism, whatever you call it. But think about it. It's happening exactly the same in England, in France, in Germany, in the United States, in Canada. So that being said, it can't be any one. If it was just the Republicans or just the Democrats or just Bush or just, Trump or just Biden or just Obama, then it would be happening in the United States and it would be fixable. We'd see, but if it was Biden, Trump would come in and he'd be fixing it. Or Obama, Bush, Obama, somebody would be fixing it. But no matter who comes in, the more money goes to the top 1%, the super rich gets richer and everybody else gets poorer. And we suffer from a crisis wherein the companies make greater and greater profit and people's salaries actually stagnate or go down. And people can no longer afford to buy the goods and services that are produced by various companies, whether it's here or abroad. So now you have a system where the amount that you're making is continually, it's not enough to survive. And that is on a downward trend where the prices of everything are going up and your salary ain't, which means the people get poorer and poorer. And that's happening in every single one of these countries. Why? Because this is not a systemic failure. This is a systemic success, because this is what this system does. This is a system that says success in this system is for corporations to make the maximum profit. That is the success in our system. That's what our system works to achieve. And it has been successful. Corporate profits have never been higher. In fact, our corporate profits now a corporation doesn't even have to make anything. You don't have to make anything. You don't have to sell anything. You can have a corporation that's in the malls and there's hardly no mall. The malls are closing. You can have a corporation that barely sells anything, but the government will bail you out if you get in a jam, number one. So you don't have to worry about it. You're always in a jam, but who cares? The government will bail you out. Number one, that's beautiful, isn't it? And number two, the dividends are paid off of stock to the wealthy stock owners, and the people who run the company, the CEO, the board of directors, their salaries are based on stock options. And so all you have to do is, let's say the government bails, you're not making anything, you're not doing anything productive. And so you're in a jam. The government bails you out. What do you do then? You take that money that the government bailed you out with, that should, of course, be used for innovation, for building factories, for coming up with new products, for paying your bills. It should be done for all of that. So the government now gives you $1 billion to get out of this jam you're in. And what do you do with that money? You buy back your own stocks. You go say, because what are you trying to do? I'm trying to make as much money as possible. How can I do that? Can I do that by coming up with innovative products or services? Can I do that with no? The quickest, most effective, and efficient way to make more money is to buy back my own stocks, to artificially inflate the value of stocks. Because this is a finance capitalist society. It's financialized. In a financialized society, the way that you make money the quickest, the most efficiently and effectively is what? With complicated financial tools. Not by selling goods or services, by coming up with financial tools. When you buy a company, you take loans out against that company. You sell off things from that. You fire the people. You take every dime that you can suck out of that company, and then you go but Chapter 11, or you try to sell it to another sucker that'll come along. Right? You don't buy a company. Let's say a company makes ink pens, and I'm Apollo or Vanguard or BlackRock. I buy this company that makes ink pens. I don't buy it to make better ink pens. I buy it to make a profit, to turn it over. So I buy this company. What do? I pump some money into its stocks to run up the cost of stock, the price value of the stocks, and then me and my whole crew buy all the stocks up that we can, and our people pump the value of stocks up. Now what do? Now I say we got to make it look like we're making a lot of money. So I sell off a bunch of the property. I take off a bunch of loans against that. I lay off a bunch of people, and I say, look how much money we have bought it up, and we've made it much more efficient. And look what the projected profit will be for next year. And people buy even more stocks, and the value of the stock goes up, and then I cash them all out. I've inflated the stocks times 10, and then I cash them all out. And then I bankrupt it or sell it as best I can or whatever. Because my job was to buy that company and to not to make pins, but to figure out how I could manipulate the value of that company as a financial tool. Companies and corporations, all this business about corporations in the West and Europe and the US don't make goods and services. They're complicated financial tools that BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street or Apollo come in to purchase so that they can turn them over some kind of way. 3 or 4 of them, combine them, turn them over. This is not. Now, here's the problem. They've been successful. The problem is not that they have not been successful, and that this system is a very successful system. What does the system do? It extracts money from the poor and the working class and puts it in the hands of the rich. It creates what? And they'll tell you, well, our system creates wealth. Exactly. It doesn't create prosperity. See, what you want is a system that creates prosperity. There's the wealth is spread out over a broad area. But if it creates wealth goes into a small group of people. For instance, we got 100 people here, right? And $1. There's 2 ways that I could do. In $100, I could have a system where everybody gets $1, or I could have a system where one guy gets $99 and the rest of them have to split the other $1. That's the system we're in, and that system is successful. And France is the first to fall. So as they've been playing this stupid Ukraine game, saying, look, we're the coalition of the willing. We're going to send troops into Ukraine. We've got to do everything we can to stop the Russians from defeating Ukraine. First of all, understand the connection between this system and the Ukraine conflict, between this successful financialized criminal, whatever you want to call it, capitalism, neoliberalism, globalism. The success of this system created the need for the Ukrainian conflict. Why? Look, if I got $100, and I want to start stealing it, I can only steal $100. If I want to steal money, I got to go out of the room and find somewhere else to steal it, right? What they have done is they have picked the bones of the working class in the West. And now, how you do that? We want to take over Guatemala and get their bananas for cheap. And we want to get the lithium from Bolivia cheap. And we want to get the chocolate and the coffee and the bananas from Africa cheap. And we want to get the oil cheap. We want to get everything by going to these other countries where people have resources and stealing their resources, overthrowing their governments, putting in puppet governments, and getting their resources for pennies on the dollar. Okay, now there's a problem. Russia and China are starting to infiltrate those markets and align with some of those countries. And those countries where they used to sell us that, they'll say, well, I can sell it to China. I can work with China. China will give me a better deal. Now, the U.S. says, well, China's taking advantage of you. And they say, nobody can take advantage of me worse than you have. So I'm looking at the deal I got with them. I like it better. That's the bottom line. In fact, what was it? China built, I forgot what it was, a hospital or something else. There was some things they built for this one company. And you know what they get in return? Chocolate. I'm going to build it to you, and you produce chocolate, and you're going to give me a break on this chocolate until it's paid off for. You know what that's called in the world? I know people that do this in the real world. You know what we call it? Bartering. Bartering. Hey man, I can do this. Yeah, I know guys. A guy that's like, man, I got a lawn service, and the other guy's like, oh, okay, and the guy's truck breaks down, and he's like, man, geez, my truck's broke down, I need this. Another guy says, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll fix your truck. You got a lawn service, you cut my lawn for a month, 2 months, and I'll fix your truck. I won't charge anything, parts or anything. I'll handle it. You cut my lawn for 2 months. Okay, that's called bartering. People have been doing that for hundreds of years. Farmers do it all the time. People in the country do that stuff. They trade, they barter, they do things like that. That's all it is. It's called bartering. So the bottom line is this. So what we're looking at is a system where if you're in Africa or South America or whatever, you can deal with Russia and China, and you can barter, and you can get some good deals. And guess what? They won't come in and assassinate the leader of your country and overthrow your government. So now a France or a US or whatever, where when we needed stuff, we could just go in and bully somebody around and take it. It ain't that easy to do anymore. And now when China says, France says we need to go to Francophone Africa, as they call it, so we can steal some more gold and stuff from these people. And then we can straighten our economy out. They can't do it now. So here's the connection. France, Germany, etc., the colonialist countries in the US all say, well, if we overthrow the government of Russia, that's the big kahuna. They've got all of this stuff there. So all we got to do is overthrow the government of Russia, and then we got everything. And then rather than be broke, we can sell their oil, we can sell their gas, we can split it up. They got timber, they got coal, they got everything we could possibly need. We'll have access to everything. And not only that, at that point, we can then, because we'll have Russia, we can say to the African and Latin American countries, guess what? You got to do what we say again, and we can completely destroy China. So that'll work. Let's go do this, because otherwise we're screwed. Except Russia didn't go along with it. Yes, let's overthrow Russia. Russia's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. We'll kill you. Okay, well, then what we're going to do is we're going to take Ukraine. That way we can surround Russia, and then we can, and Russia's like, no, the hell you are. Not happening. And we'll kill you if you try. It's not going to happen. So they gave it a shot, and while they didn't kill France or Germany, whatever, they stuck a proxy in there, these poor damn Ukrainians, and they're getting mowed down like cordwood. So now France is now like, and Europe is like, okay, we got to go, and we've got to fight Russia ourselves. And before they got an opportunity, first of all, they can't do that. Before they got an opportunity to even make that argument to their people, things at the so-called coalition of the willing are falling apart. Let me show you. I have here a quote from Friedrich Merz. Friedrich Merz. Let me find a quote from Friedrich Merz. Here we go. This is recently. Friedrich Merz. There's a deep-seated fear of war among parts of our population. I don't share it, but I can relate to it. I have no fear of war. I guess you don't. You're going to send everybody else's kids to die. There's a deep-seated fear amongst the people who would actually have to go die in the war. Now, I don't share it because I'd be sending them to die in the war, not actually dying in the war myself. So why would I be afraid? Why would Merz be afraid of a war? Not to mention that he'd die in a nuclear holocaust anyway. But for Merz to say there's a deep-seated fear of war among parts of our population, yeah, the parts that would die or lose their kids or families, I don't share it, but I can relate to it. But at any rate, so this so-called coalition of the willing are like, yeah, we're really going to go for it. And now I guess we just have to fight Russia ourselves, even though, notwithstanding the reality that they don't have the war material, nor do they have the political will or anything else to do it. This financialized economic system um, is starting to unravel. I'm sure you've heard the old saying, be careful what you pray for, you might just get it. They have instituted this neoliberal system, praying that it would be successful. And it has been successful. And it's still successful. So now they have a system in place and they have full control of that system, a system that takes every dime from the poor and working class and plants it directly into the hands of the richest people in the world, and they are getting nothing but richer. So that's the system they want. They're successful. Some people are like, this, the problem with this system, it doesn't work. Yeah, no, that's not the problem with the system that it doesn't work. The problem with the system is that it does work. It works exactly as it's supposed to work. And what it does is what it's supposed to do, which is extract money from the working class and the poor and put it in the hands of the richest people on earth and make them even richer. And now, I remember when this thing first started, one of the things Vladimir Putin mentioned, the elites, and in one of his speeches, he says, and I'm sure, at some point, there'll be a new set of elites. He knew that at some point this was going to fall. When this first started, I remember interviewing Scott Ritter on my Sputnik show back then. And when it first started, within weeks afterwards, Scott Ritter said, when this thing's over, none of these governments that supported this are going to stand. They're all going to fall. And I really thought to myself, yeah. So now what they're facing is a number of things. And I don't know which is worse. Number one, a humiliating defeat on the battlefield. And it's not just the defeat of their military assets and their military proxy. Here's the worst thing for, let's just say, the Europeans, because the Americans have been down this road before and they know how to run the hell out anytime there's an L. Right? There's an L coming. There's a loss coming. The Americans are like, bye-bye. They're going to leave you hanging. See ya. That's what Trump's up to now. Hey, we're about to lose this war. Trump's like, what do you mean we? I'm out of here. Have a nice day. See you later. Your war. Deal with it. If it's going to win, you saw how Trump did with the Iranians and Israelis. The Israelis did this maneuver where they're going to do all of this, a decapitation strike against the Iranians, and it looked like it was like working. And Trump was like, yes, sir, I knew all about it. I was all over it, bruh. That was me right there. I was down with that. Nice. Then all of a sudden it falls apart. There's missiles raining down on Israel, and Trump's like, yeah, I haven't been involved in it anyway. I don't know. These people are crazy. Probably not a good idea. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have did it. But that's Trump, right? If you're winning, he's on your side. If you're losing, he can't stand you. It's just hilarious, right? But that being said, Europeans, take note. He's doing the same thing to you. The United States, along with Britain, got this thing going. France and Germany was in, but it was mostly U.S. and Britain getting this thing going, this Ukraine conflict, this Ukraine project going. And as long as Biden was there and the neoliberals or whatever, yes, we got to keep going. This is our project, because they live off of a narrative. They're different than Trump. They live off of a narrative. They make a narrative, and then they're trapped within the context of that narrative. That's the big loss for the liberal people, is losing, because they take a narrative and they live and die with that narrative. Okay, Putin's evil. He can't possibly win. He's fighting with shovels. Ukrainians are going to win. We've got to defeat them, or else they're going to take all of Europe. So they just keep digging their hole deeper and deeper, this narrative. Oh, it's going to be so bad. It's terrible. We can't possibly lose this one. We're not going to lose. We're going to win. Blah, blah, blah. So that's the narrative they run with. And the narrative is going to fall. And they live off a narrative, and that's all they have. Now, here's where Biden was the same way. Now, here's where Trump's different. Trump has no connection to any narrative. You can't track Trump. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if what he's saying is true. He doesn't care if it's false. He doesn't care if it is contradicting what he said yesterday or 1 hour ago. Where you had to learn, really what you should have learned Trump, was when this was one thing that I'll never forget. Trump says, yes, Zelensky's a dictator. And like a couple days later, they came back to Trump, and there maybe a week, and they said, Well, didn't you call? Well, you called Zelensky a dictator. He's like, me, dictator? I don't remember that. It was on videotape. It was all over the place. They were complaining about it in Europe, and they were complaining in Congress. They're complaining in New York Times. All the neoliberals and neoconservatives are complaining because Trump called Zelensky a dictator. And when they ask him, he says, I remember saying that. You see, Trump is not trapped by a narrative. See, that's the difference. They make a narrative and they go down with that narrative. This is what I said, and it's true. If Trump said, yes, the Russians have to lose, we're going to defeat them, and the Russians started winning, they'd say, so what do you think now the Russians are going to win? And Trump said, yeah, I knew they were going to win all along. Well, didn't you say they were going to lose? I don't remember saying that. Of course, the Russians are going to win. Everybody knows the Russians are going to win. I've been saying that all along. The Russians are going to win. Yeah, it is what it is. He can't be trapped because he does not care. Okay, so the Europeans, now that they've tried to take Russia so they could steal all of Russia's stuff, so they could somehow get out of this neoliberal trap that they've made for themselves of poverty and economic disgrace, are facing a number of things. Number one, the Ukraine stuff's falling apart. The front's collapsing. Trump and company are saying we just don't have the war material to send to them no more. We can't send them this stuff anymore. We need it for other things. God only knows. I don't want to know what that is. Bad, of course, but notwithstanding what they're going to use them for, we can't send the stuff anymore. So Ukraine was running out of soldiers. They're running out of war material. Oh, by the way, and Trump says to the Europeans, and you got to buy this stuff from me. Whatever goes there, you got to pay me for it. And France is economically collapsing. How do you think the people are going to feel about France coming up with another X amount of billions of euros to go to Ukraine? Not so good. And I suspect that this is the tip of the iceberg because Keir Starmer's in deep and serious trouble. Within the next 2 months, I suspect England to follow suit, wherein the internal economic contradictions of neoliberalism rise to a level that the people can't stand the pain. And Keir Starmer and the government will not be able to continue to pretend that this stuff is not there, to overlook the economic pain of the people, because once it gets but so bad, and it's rapidly getting there, the people in England will take to the street, and I think there'll be violence and things being burnt down and all kinds of stuff will go bad there. And of course, last but not least is Germany. Now, as I've said, the Germans, they likely wouldn't come to a protest unless the government issues them a ticket and tells them what time to be there. So God knows what the Germans, I'm sure they're going to be last to the party. Love the Germans. God bless you, Germans. But they sure, a lot of German people have a way of abiding by, whatever they're told to do. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but the time is coming for Germany too, because human beings can only take so much, and everybody has this breaking point. Every camel can only take so much weight, and you put one straw too many on the camel's back, it's going to break. And so all of these other countries are obviously going to face the same thing. We're starting with France, and I don't think there's a way out for this. I don't think that the people in France now, there's been protests. You remember the yellow vests and protests over immigration and all kinds of things. But what we have now is not a protest over an issue. We don't have a protest over a situation, something they're unhappy with. You have a protest. And this is the big problem that the French government's going to have. You've got to protest and fury and anger over a system that is not an unsuccessful system. You've got to protest over a system that is successful in what it does. And the protests are because the system is successful. So the protest in France is not against Macron per se. They want him gone. It's not against the decisions that he makes per se, because what he's doing is straight neoliberalism right out of the handbook. It is because if you operate a neoliberal system, this is exactly what it produces. So what they're saying is, think about it. They're saying we're tired of you reducing taxes on the rich and increasing taxes on the poor and cutting services so that the rich can get richer. We don't want that to happen. But you live in a country that's neoliberal, so that is the system. That's all the system does. So what they are actually protesting is the system itself, and the system is successful. It's not the system. You can't tweak neoliberalism. You can't change neoliberalism. Either you're in a system that extracts money from the working class or the poor, or you ain't. There ain't no way to tweak that because that's what it does. That's what you're in. Either you're inside or you're outside. So the French people now are protesting the system, and which means that the system has to change or the people will tear the country apart. I suspect general strikes, maybe the government will fall. They're not just going to say, okay, Macron, put in a new prime minister, but continue. And they have to get a budget through at some point. And here's the question about the budget. And see, this is the systemic part of it. A neoliberal budget may put some furry fluff and some pretty flowers on it, but a neoliberal government is going to close the economic gap by robbing the poor and continue to look out for the rich. That's what a neoliberal budget. They need a budget. They need to get a budget. And a neoliberal budget will clearly continue to do what they're doing. So the question is, will they tolerate another neoliberal budget or not? I don't think they will. And the other part of it is this: they ain't the last, because as the British have to get through a budget, as they have to deal with their economic pain, they're going to run into the same thing. Because guess what's coming? Major cuts for everybody, for the working class. Major cuts for the working class. And the question will then become, are the people going to tolerate it? I don't think they will. I don't think they will. So what we have now is, as they scream Putin this and Putin that, I think the Russians have played this well in a way, because I'll put it like this. I'll put this two ways. Option one is the Russians have dragged this thing out because they're in no rush and because this is the way they fight. They exhaust their enemy. That's one way to look at it. And they ain't in a rush, and this is the way they fight. Another possibility, and I will throw this out because I don't know which one it is. I would suspect the former. But another option is this: that the Russians could have, in fact, moved faster than they did. But they understood exactly what I understand, that time is on their side. That rather than collapse Ukraine at a time when Europe, France and Germany and England are still stable enough, and their governments are stable enough, and their internal political and economic contradiction hasn't risen to the point where they're facing political, social, and economic instability. See, they're still stable enough to try to raise, hey, the Russians are winning, we got to fire some missiles at them or something. We can deal with that. But if the Russians move more slowly, what they actually end up with is a France, a Germany, and an England that's in collapse, that's fallen apart, that is trying to survive, that is between governments. So there's nobody in England or France or Germany that can stand up and say, we've got to prioritize Ukraine, because the people are screaming, we're hurt. The people are screaming, we're poor. And let me add this. And the closer we get to midwinter, the more likely that scenario becomes, because this winter, I think there's going to be issues with energy. I think there's going to be issue with energy prices. And I think that the lights are going to be out in Ukraine. The Russians are going to do that. Then I think one of the issues you'll be dealing with is massive refugees. A refugee crisis in Europe at a time when the Europeans can't feed their own people, at a time when the Europeans are going to be struggling to pay the prices of energy. So my point is, I think that what we're looking at is this coalition of the willing not collapsing from the problems around, not collapsing from not being able to fight Russia, not being able to manage the Ukraine conflict, or their arguments and fights between the U.S., internal NATO squabbling, but imploding from their internal economic contradictions, which will be compounded by the fact that they need to, if they want to keep up their narrative with Ukraine, they need to send money to Ukraine to continue the money laundering operation. They need to send money to the US because the US won't send any more weapons unless Europe pays for it. So they're going to have internal economic contradictions and calamities that will be catastrophic in nature. And that will not just be money problems, that will be structural economic problems. The people are going to be going nuts. And the leaders, whoever they may be then, are not going to be able to say, we got to focus on Ukraine right now, because they'll have to be worried about getting hung or getting their heads cut off, literally. So I think that's what we're looking at moving into the winter. I think the Russians are not in a big rush because they're economically stable, and their allies are economically stable. Might I add, the United States has some very serious problems. If you've been paying attention to, we talked about France, we talked about Germany, we've talked about England to some extent, marginally, but we talked about them in the context of economic problems from neoliberalism. The United States has an additional problem, and that is an economic war against China. One of the things that has happened is, if you've been paying attention, is soybean farmers, where the U.S. buys China buys tens of billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds of soybeans, like every 3 months. And they're down to zero. And China buys 61% of all the soybeans in the world. If the United States got every market, sold every soybean to every country in the world that buys soybeans other than China, right? The United States lost China. If every other country said we're going to buy all of our soybeans from the United States, it still wouldn't be enough for us to make up what we lost in China. That's how big their soybean market is. So here's the bottom line. We've got a huge farming industry that is dead and ain't coming back. And all these soybean farmers are like, hey, we need a bailout. How are you going to bail them out? What are you going to do? What happens next year? What happens when they need to plant their crops in the fall? Okay, you plant your crops? Yeah, what for? You don't have a market for them. Well, we're planting all of our crops to sell to China. Oh, that's right. Wait, China's not buying any of them. The market is gone and it ain't coming back. And I don't blame the Chinese. Look, as I was talking, have said time and again, if I'm China and you're saying I'm setting up to go to war with you, I want to destroy your economy. And I would if I'm China. Look, so you want to go to war with me? Yeah. Okay. Very quietly. I'm not going to scream it in front of your face, but I'm going to do everything I can. Do I sell you things like antimony, what the antimony and was it geranium or different things like this? They sell these what are they called? Rare earth metals that we use for, everything from missiles to fighter planes to ships, right? I'm telling you none of it. Oh, by the way, I buy lots of pork from you and beef from you and soybeans. I buy none of it. I'm outsourcing everything. I ain't buying nothing from you. You are planning on going to war with me, and I want you as poor as possible, and I want you as lightly armed as possible. And anything that you can use, whether it's in your economy or in your military industrial complex, I'm not going to sell you the missile to shoot with me, buddy. Anything you can use. So we're in a situation where very quietly and subtly, China is tanking our economy. And I would if I were China. They'd be fools if they don't tank our economy in any way, shape. If I'm China and you're saying, yes, you can't do what you want in the South China Sea, I'd say, what's the name of that sea again? South China Sea. What the hell are you doing in the South China Sea trying to tell me what to do? Well, you can't buy this and that. You have to do what I tell you to do. No, I don't. Well, then I will build bases all around you, and I may have to go to war with you. Oh, really? Well, then I'm going to do everything I can to impoverish you. That's what I do if I was China. That is the reasonable, smart thing to do. So the coalition of the collapsing. France is the first domino to fall. And from the looks of things, I'm going to say England will be the second domino to fall. And I'm going to say, as we get deep into the winter, I think the first two winners, the Europeans were able to muddle through. I think this third winter ain't going to be a good time for them. I think this is going to be a time where the Ukrainians are going to be screaming, help, help. The Russians are beating the hell out of us. And they're going to say, you think you got it bad? And the people here want to cut our heads off. So, all right, let me look and see. Do we have, oops, sorry about that. Do we have any super chats? We got some. I will have to answer the super chats. Let's go and find the soup. Why am I doing it like that? I must be out of my mind. Here we go. Let's go. Sean says, in reference to France, the devil is here to collect. There you go. The devil is here to collect his due. Will the Sahel nations come to the rescue of their beloved emperor and empress, the Macron, and their beloved France? No, that ain't happening. Malcolm X said, what did he say? He said, when he's talking about slavery, the field slave, he said, when the master's house caught on fire, the field slave prayed for wind. That's what they're going to do. As your tormentor home catches on fire, you pray for wind. Sparky says, thank you, Sparky. Broad prosperity requires a large middle class. A large middle class is made up of small business owners and union members. Unfortunately, there was the war on unions and the war on small businesses. That's right. Look, after the Great Depression, FDR put in a lot of things that the right wing hated. And there we go. And they've been trying to turn all of the Depression era things back, and they've been pretty successful. That's the problem with the system. It's successful, and it's successful in doing something that's going to infuriate the working class. The system is working as intended. Exactly, Sparkster. Exactly, my dear friend. Now, let's go to Matt Lasek says, wild idea. Would they try to bring Israel into NATO? Well, first of all, they don't have to. Think about it. When Iran was firing at Israel, you had ships from England, France, Italy, the U.S. trying to shoot down those missiles. Israel doesn't have to be brought into NATO. Israel is part of NATO already. So, our answer, that's right. Excuse me for yawning. Crippling austerity for the maxes. Yeah, that's what they give us. All right, let's continue. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy Sunday night. If you can afford it, buymeacoffee.com is good. It'll say like buy Garland a coffee. How much? $5. And you can make it monthly, just like Patreon, or you can make it a one-time, as many as you want to. So you got Patreon, you got Buy Me a Coffee, Cash App, PayPal, and of course, as you see going across the bottom, is my P.O. box. Certainly appreciated. Anything you can afford is appreciated. As you know, Scott Ritter and I are working on a plan for Owatash here to go with Scott in November. Anything you can contribute to that. A lot of things got to be done and bought for that, and all that stuff would be highly appreciated. However, even if you can't afford it, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. I'm out.